the natives expressed to the people of the United States their welcome, despite the fact that the atoll of Bikini may be utterly destroyed come July the 1st. But they're more than willing to cooperate, although they don't understand the world of nuclear energy any more than we do.
All right now, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind, and that this experiment here
minus 15 seconds.
Now they have heard of our plan for their evacuation. Will you ask King Judah to get up and tell us now what his people think and if they're willing to go?
9, 8, 7, 6.
Everything good, and they're willing to go, and everything is God's hand. Well, you tell them in King Judah that everything being in God's hands, it cannot be other than good.
5, 4, 3, 2,
37 years after atomic testing began on Bikini, Palau, a small island chain to its west, officially declared itself a republic and banned all nuclear weapons from crossing its borders. As exuberant citizens watched, a skydiver carried the new nation's flag to its first raising. With events on Bikini still fresh in its memory, Palau had done what no country had done before. Its 7,000 voters had ratified a constitution making Palau and its territorial waters a nuclear-free zone.
For our country, it's a statement that we do not want any part of our country to be used for nuclear armaments. If we don't play our part in stopping this madness, this nuclear armaments, then the world, as a whole, including Palau, may just be bombed out of existence.
In a matter of seconds, the race can be wiped out. If we allow any storage of nuclear weapons here, we will be used as a target area for big, powerful nations.
It's a good model for the rest of the world to follow at this time, because how many people have a nuclear-free constitution?
They want very much to be a nuclear-free zone, to be free from the use, from the storage and passage of nuclear weapons. And this is something which I think they have a right to ask.
Around the world, opposition to the spread of nuclear weapons has begun to shift from demonstrations to legislation. With nearly 50,000 nuclear warheads deployed by the 5 major powers across vast areas, more than 800 cities and counties scattered through these nations have recently declared themselves nuclear-free zones. A nuclear-free Pacific movement is growing, with Palau at its forefront. Micronesia, 2,000 islands spread across an expanse of the western Pacific as large as the U.S. itself. On its eastern edge, Bikini. On its western edge, Palau. 8 tiny islands which are home for 15,000 people. From its nearby Saipan headquarters, America controls Palau and all of Micronesia under a special United Nations charter as a strategic trust. It is administered by the Department of Interior under the National Security Council. If current American bases in Japan and the unstable Philippines were given up, U.S. defense planners see the islands of Tinian, Guam, and Palau as a fallback arc for withdrawal of U.S. forces. Palau especially is close to shipping lanes from the Middle East, vital to Japanese and American oil supplies. America's nuclear arsenal in the Pacific is massive. 200 ships and subs and 18,000 planes patrol the area. An estimated 70% of them carry nuclear weapons. A nuclear-free zone in the heart of America's Pacific nuclear arsenal poses a dilemma for U.S. defense planners.
We are committed to defend those islands as the United States and its people are defended. That provision of their Constitution would make it impossible for us to carry out the defense responsibilities which we were otherwise prepared to undertake. Right now, under the trusteeship agreement, of course, we have the right to establish facilities in Palau. The fact that we haven't done so in the 35 years of the trusteeship to date doesn't mean that we will never have an interest in doing so.
The United States gets the right to stake claim to defend us from other people that would be our enemies. And as I told them at the time when I was chairman of the Status Committee, we had no enemies. And, so this must be for your own protection. So I guess the right way to look at it is the United States gets the right to use these islands to protect its own interest, including the use of nuclear weapons. But, it's still our country. We have no place to go, if it goes off.
The US government has taken a stand against this clause. As you probably have read or heard, they attempted to revise our constitution.
Palau's disputed constitution was the result of a month-long drafting convention. Delegates and lawyers reduced over 400 drafts to the final version, banning nuclear weapons from crossing their borders. But U.S. demands that the nuclear-free clause be removed forced 3 separate elections on the Constitution, and 3 times Palauan voters upheld their clause by overwhelming majorities. Since the first Spanish ship called there in the early 1800s, Palauans have generations of experience with foreigners in their islands. They have developed their culture for 2,000 years in a setting that fits the Western image of a tropical paradise. They call themselves the Rey Mithal, the people of the deep sea. In their creation legends, it was the sea that gave them birth. It has sustained their past, and it may provide their future through seabed mining, new forms of energy production, and fisheries. Despite colonization by the Spanish, the Germans, and the Japanese, Palauans have kept much of their culture intact. From such traditions as the ceremony of the ancient war canoe, and in each celebration of a new birth. In the 1920s and 30s, the colonial Japanese created a thriving economy in Micronesia, proving Palau's commercial potential. They also fortified Palau, claiming this would prevent attack by other foreign powers.
September 15, 1944, the United States Marines hit the beaches of Palau. Wave after wave of assault troops are hopelessly pinned down as they try to come up off the reef.
On Palau's island of Belau, thousands died in some of the bloodiest fighting in World War II, as America won the Pacific Islands from Japan yard for yard. Palauans took refuge in caves and came out to find their homes and lands devastated.
In San Francisco, representatives of 46 nations meet to secure the world against war. Every delegate who registers is firmly resolved to do his utmost to prevent another world conflagration. Inside the convention hall, 300 world representatives gather for the first session of the conference, which is led by Secretary of State Edward R. Stettini, which will present General de Gaulle's idea.
World opinion supported their independence. The UN Trusteeship Council was established to oversee a process of decolonization. Under its supervision, 11 colonial possessions became trust territories to be governed by their foreign rulers until they were ready to choose either independence or continued political ties.
Canada's
but
delegation.
Micronesia posed a
charter
special
based on the Dumbarton-Oaks formula will be planned. Russia's foreign commissar Molotov will play an important role in the proceedings.
If we do not want to die together in war, we must learn to live together in peace, not only possible but certain.
In a compromise that was a major diplomatic coup for the United States, Micronesia was declared a strategic trust. Unlike the other territories, it was placed under supervision of the Security Council. Because of its veto power there, the U.S. had gained virtually unlimited authority in Micronesia. Under control of the U.S. Navy, Micronesia was sealed off from the outside world. Security passes were needed to get in.
Bombs started Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands, where Universal's Floyd Traham took these first pictures. American officials discussed plans with the Bikini natives for the evacuation of the atoll. The islanders are a nomadic group and are well pleased that the Yanks are going to add a little variety to their lives. They're off for the atoll of Rogerich, 109 miles away, where there is more rain and better coconuts. Here the natives will be safe from the atom bombing tests at Bikini, those tests which are so highly important to the world, the tests that will help chart the future for us all.
With the islanders moved out, an army of construction workers moved in to ready the site for nuclear testing.
Working as a task force team, the Army, Navy, and Air Force work against time to prepare the installations for M-Hour under the supervision of scientists who have labored for years to develop the thermonuclear weapon. The shot island is almost ready for the sacrifice. M-Hour approaches with terrifying rapidity.
Names of Micronesian islands that became a litany with the relocation of native peoples and the destruction of their ancestral lands. In the next 12 years, 66 American nuclear blasts would rock the Marshall Islands. Further to the south, France and Britain would soon begin a series of 65 nuclear tests. Newsreels of the American tests were carefully censored. What the public did not see was that winds spread fallout from the test over 2,000 miles of ocean. Rates of stillbirths doubled. Thyroid cancer increased by 35%. Genetic damage continued to appear in birth defects and retardation. Palau and the rest of Micronesia were untouched by the testing or by much of anything else. And while no expense had been spared for the nuclear experiments, Palau received little help in rebuilding from the war's destruction. This despite UN trusteeship charter requirements that the U.S. promote the political, economic, social, and educational advancement of the people and lead them to eventual self-government. Dr. William Vittorelli was one of the first American educators in Palau. He and his family lived there for over 20 years while he served in various administrative posts.
The policies are set forth by headquarters and by the United States. Washington was very different from what our concept was, which I took from the United Nations Charter, which said that we were supposed to develop them toward independence. But when I even mentioned that word in an article in the newspaper, they thought I was a communist because I was trying to make these people independent. And in those days, I was very anxious for more money to do something with, to buy prime movers. materials and things that we could do. And then later on, when Kennedy came in, we got too much money. They just threw it at us.
Within the limits of our responsibility in such matters, my country intends to be a participant and not merely an observer in the peaceful, expeditious movement of nations from status of colonies to the partnership of equals. My country favors a world of free and equal states. We agree with those who say that colonialism is a key issue in this assembly. My nation was once a colony, and we know what colonialism means. The exploitation and subjugation of the weak by the powerful, of the many by the few, of the governed who have given no consent to be governed. That continuing tide of self-determination which runs so strong has our sympathy and our support.
President Kennedy's UN speech against colonialism would signal a radical change in America's Micronesian policy. A 1961 Trusteeship Council report had been sharply critical of U.S. administration of the Strategic Trust. Outraged, President Kennedy appointed a commission to investigate. It was headed by Harvard's Anthony M. Solomon. His report agreed with the UN's findings. The solution, it said, was money. With that, the new frontier went to Micronesia. In Palau, daily life in the villages had changed little for centuries. Children learned skills from elders and grew up in the security of an enduring culture. In the ancient matrilineal system, the women chose the chiefs who managed community affairs in a unique blend of conflict and cooperation. With the arrival of the new frontier, all this suddenly began to change. The emphasis of the Kennedy administrators was on education, political development, and social programs. In the blaze of progress, schools went up around the territory, and legions of teachers were hired to bring young Micronesians into the 20th century with an American curriculum. American-style politics began to replace the clan-based traditional system. Accomplished politicians in their own culture, Palauans adopted American forms and ideals with gusto. Overnight, government became Palau's largest employer as it hired graduates of the American school system at higher wages than Palau had ever known. Villagers flocked to Koror, Palau's capital, in search of the American dream.
American dream. Somebody see. It's what I need. American dream. American dream. Makes you believe. American dream. American dream. American dream.
Consumer goods, attitude in life. Nowadays, it's a constant fight between, do I go cultural or Palauan custom, or do I go Western? Every day. Especially these young generations, and that's one of they attribute that to one of the reasons why we have a high rate of teenage suicide in Micronesia.
Sold on the American dream, the youth of Palau are unsatisfied with the old ways. But the new way is a cultural schizophrenia that has led to rampant alcoholism and drug abuse. The American dream has not materialized for most Palauans. Now 60% of Palau's population is under 25, and there aren't enough government jobs to go around. For the young, the legacy of the new frontier is unemployment and widespread feelings of hopelessness. Where did American policymakers go wrong?
American education is the best. Bring in American politics, that's the best point. American economics, that's the best point. And the officials from Washington and headquarters were always doing things that they thought was best for the people, dealing with them as children. We know what is best. We know what is best. The worst thing they could have done is try to impose an American system on a foreign country which is not geared for it.
Every 3 years, UN visiting missions come to Palau to investigate what the U.S. has accomplished in education, health, politics, and especially economic development. Their findings are then sent to the UN Security Council. Though some question the UN's effectiveness, events of the Kennedy years had proved its importance as a conduit to world public opinion and to the White House. The team's host in the village of Nirimlingui on Palau's west coast was Senator Lucius Malso.
Congratulations, Senator. I think in the United States no senator can do that.
I used to be a kid, just those guys.
Senator Malso explained problems faced by his home village, problems common to villages throughout Palau.
And most of the people use, kerosene
to cook.
Yeah.
How much does it cost?
Well, a gallon is like $1.95.
The UN hears a recurrent theme in villages' statements. Under U.S. administration, improvements to further their economic development have not been made.
No, we don't have. I don't have any.
The old Japanese, pineapple agriculture was, behind those hills. And they were like exporting pineapples.
Are people doing the same and exporting pineapples?
Not yet, not now. It stopped when the US came in,
At the heart of Palau's economic stagnation is its underdeveloped infrastructure, the system of roads, utilities, and health care that are the foundation of any economy. A striking example of this is the road system. Most roads are still mud tracks. In over 37 years of American trusteeship, less than 12 miles of Palauan roads have been paved, most of them in Koror, the capital city. Most sections of Koror's water and sewage system operate only 2 hours a day, while running water on the rest of the islands is non-existent. The country's one hospital provides inexpensive medical care for many Palauans, yet its inadequate bathrooms lack running water most of the time, and Koror's unreliable power supply threatens the safety of the patients.
I think the United States' obligation was to put a running water system here in Palau. To put a reliable source of power here in Palau. To pave the roads. The roads were in Koror were better after the war. But the United States, because hated Japanese so much, because they have been fighting and very involved fighting here in Palau as well, they destroyed the road. They said, we'll build you new roads. They destroyed the buildings that were still intact after the war. And we'll build you new buildings. They haven't built the buildings. No, I don't think the United States has lived up to its obligations.
We have not been able to achieve everything we had hoped to. And I was very much involved in this, of course, when I was as Director of Territories, when I was in the Department of Interior. And we had a lot of projects and so forth that were behind schedule and on delivery. But I think, on balance, that if you take a look at what is there today, and you've been in Palau and you've seen the roads and the airports, you saw that beautiful bridge at Babelda. That's quite an engineering triumph.
This massive cantilever bridge connects Palau's harbor with the airport, where recently granted U.S. funds are extending the runway to accommodate larger jets. Critics charge, however, that these public works mainly serve U.S. military purposes, and they note the absence of rural roads for much-needed agricultural development.
I don't know whether it is by design or by what, but after 30 years under United States colonialism, we have become so dependent on it to the point that we don't see any development in our island for our self-reliance. We don't have any infrastructure to be able to contain any tourism that we're going to get into. We don't have any. We sit in the middle of fishing ground of the world, and we don't even have a single fishing fleet.
Instead, Palauans have learned to be consumers. Increasingly, locally produced foods are overlooked in favor of costly imports. Many buy canned fish caught in Palauan waters by foreign fishermen and processed in Japan or the U.S. Karora's power system is dependent on costly imported diesel fuel to run its outmoded generators. Yet power outages are common.
We look at appropriate technology as one of the means toward self-reliance. Because the fuel consumption in Palau to run the generators, to generate electricity and the village and all, and running these boats all over the place, cost us 1/3 of our budget every year. And we're going to suffer through that for the next years until we realize that if we don't go solar, that if we don't go ocean technology, thermal energy, or anything like that, it just makes our self-sufficiency a little bit further away as we're more dependent on the imported fuel.
Well, considering the fact that we have been under the United States government for over 30 years, and still we don't have any economy, anyone can say that this must have been the intention of the United States government.
Would the U.S. have purposely created economic dependence in Micronesia? In 1971, a student journal, the Young Micronesian, discovered that the Solomon Commission's report to the president in 1963 had been classified. The students made public for the first time leaked portions of the report that sent shockwaves through the territory. Noting that the U.S. was torn between the need to retain full control over Micronesia and its stated policy of not acquiring new territorial possessions, the report proposed an integrated master plan for bringing Micronesia into permanent affiliation with the United States. The UN requires that territories hold elections on such issues, but the report recommended that the plebiscite should be publicly announced only 3 months in advance to reduce the time in which any opposition could campaign against affiliation. The Solomon Report urged an effective capital investment program before the plebiscite to replace the deadly feeling of economic dormancy. It noted, the importance of those funds in influencing a favorable plebiscite is obvious, but the spending involved will not set off a self-sustaining development in the area. While U.S. officials deny the report was ever made policy, Anthony Solomon, now the head of New York's Federal Reserve Bank, declined to be interviewed for this film. Most of his report remains classified.
They have geared everything in recent years, since Kennedy on, to a takeover. So I would say the bottom line, if we can use that of the United States administration, was to help them become independent, to help them for political independence. And that has been the last thing they've done.
The United States does not have any interest in us, in our areas whatsoever. I think their interest is for security.
The overall purpose of our forward defense posture in the Western Pacific is to enable us to protect our allies and ourselves from encroachments of any kind, such as those made prior to the Second World War, during the Second World War, and the kind of encroachments that we have seen so many times a little bit farther to the west. Vietnam, Cambodia, Afghanistan, you name it. We have at this time forward bases primarily in Japan and the Philippines. Moving slightly back from there, Guam is the linchpin of our next line of defense in the Western Pacific. Our defense planners believe that the facilities on Guam might have to be complemented by others on Tinian, conceivably in Palau.
Today, Palau could not survive without U.S. aid. 80% of working Palauans are government employees, and virtually all government funding comes from the United States. Against this backdrop, Palau and the rest of Micronesia are attempting to forge a new relationship with the United States. The change is embodied in a proposed treaty called the Compact of Free Association. It is designed to terminate the last UN trusteeship. The product of 13 difficult years at the bargaining table, it is a compromise between Palauan demands for self-rule and U.S. insistence on retaining military control of the islands. At first, Palauan strategy was to hire American lawyers to represent them. But later, Palauan lawyers trained in America took over and quickly became known as tough negotiators on their own behalf. The result was important financial concessions by the United States.
So it'll be $23 million on the average for 15 years, plus the roads and the water system and the power system that we have asked the United States to build.
Under free association, Palau is going to have full internal self-government and very substantial authority in foreign affairs, including treaty-making power. Only defense rights will be reserved to the United States. Palau, in other words, will be just a step or so short of full independence.
Under the compact, the U.S. keeps military control of the territory for 50 years, perhaps indefinitely. Under the compact, the U.S. keeps military control of the territory for 50 years, perhaps indefinitely. In Palau, this means access to 1/3 of the main island for jungle warfare training, plus military use of the harbor and 2 airstrips. Palau gets control of its internal affairs, but there's an international legal problem.
The compact contained provisions which would allow the United States to introduce nuclear weapons under certain specified circumstances. This was in conflict with the Constitution of the Republic of Palau.
You probably know most of our modern ships are nuclear powered, and particularly those we use for long distances from their home ports in West Coast or Hawaii. And that means that virtually any ship that we are apt to have operating in Palauan waters for Palau's defense will be nuclear powered. Well, that ship may have to put into Palauan waters, and under the Palauan Constitution, as written, it couldn't do so.
We don't intend to restrict our ability to defend the Pacific Basin, and we're not going to.
The curiosity about Belau and its relationship to the United States is there's nothing gratuitous about the United States' obligation in Palau. That's a sworn promise under the trusteeship agreement, which was signed in 1947, approved by both houses of the United States Congress, and signed by the President of the United States. And it was an undertaking to the entire world that this trusteeship over Belau would advance Belau's human rights as well as its economy and its political situation. The Belauans are now in a position where, in order to seek that advancement, they must cede approximately 1/3 of their land and destroy their own nuclear-free constitution. And it seems to me that it is very much like the situation of a small forest animal getting its leg caught in a trap and biting off that leg to get out.
Our Constitution provides for an avenue through which we can suspend or waive that prohibition. But a waiver is not easy to come by. It's going to take 75% of the Palauans to waive or to suspend that prohibition.
Will Palauans agree to U.S. demands that they waive their nuclear-free clause? In a territory-wide plebiscite on the compact, Palau will be the first to vote. This house is on land slated for U.S. military use under the compact. The Orak family who own it are typical of many villagers whose homes would be affected.
And I don't like it either, because if they agree the compact, there is no more right for them to say we can stay here, because they already signed the paper, yes. And so when the military comes, they will tell them to move, they will have to take their belongings and go, no choice.
James Orak is an agricultural student in the United States. His alarm over the compact's land use provisions has brought him home on the eve of the plebiscite.
I am majoring in agriculture, and I know my island needs agricultural development. The population is going up. And my plan was to come back and help my family to establish some kind of agricultural development here. But today, when I see it, my dream will be destroyed when the United States military comes to this island. These beaches are going to be used for the military training landing sites. And so when they come, they will bring the tanks and all the heavy equipment, and they will put them on the reef, and they're going to start rolling from the reef all the way to the inland. And the water and the inland will be destroyed. And I believe that once Palau is destroyed, there is no way you can build another Palau.
Looking at it from the United States standpoint, we will be giving up our executive privileges, if you will, of administering the territory. I guess under eminent domain, we also you might consider that we're giving up our rights to take land under eminent domain, but that will again be replaced by an agreement, the types of agreements we're talking about.
So it's a very complicated document, several thousand words, a couple of hundred sections, I guess. It's very detailed, in part because I suppose you could say the Micronesians were a little bit suspicious of us. As I'm sure you heard out there, they consider that the United States has not lived up to all of its undertakings under the trusteeship agreement, and they were the ones who wanted it spelled out exactly what the United States would do for them under this new relationship of free association.
This is the compact, together with its subsidiary agreements. It's hundreds of pages long, and it was written by a bunch of very clever lawyers with very convoluted cross-reference, and in one point it says one thing, and another point you have to go to some subsidiary agreement and some other section and so on. It's really very difficult, even for a trained professional, to figure out what the thing actually means.
It's the masterpiece of cross-references. It's difficult to read. It's written in English by attorneys, full of ambiguities. There's a lot of undue influence, or outside or external factors, which really play a lot upon the outcome of the vote.
As the date for the plebiscite approached, Belau was in ferment. On each side of the issue, factions formed, splitting villages and even families. Six weeks before the plebiscite, the United States Department of Interior allocated $315,000 for a political education program designed to explain the compact to only 7,000 Palauan voters.
They tell us that if you vote for the compact, you will have more assistance for your school. You will be free to go in and out of the United States. Roads will be built, hospitals, schools. It seems like it's a campaign. It's not educating, because all they do is telling us, this is good, vote for it, because it's for your own good. And I don't think that was a very a good way to educate our people.
US and Palau government has been playing games with each other, and therefore the common people are left out. They really don't know the issues.
In response to what they saw as an unfair official education program, some Palauans organized a grassroots education program of their own. Despite lack of funds, time pressure, and local opposition, they worked long hours in community meetings like this one to bring accurate information to the voters.
The common people themselves are not educated. They don't know what's going on, and there's a hunger for that kind of information because that means life and death to us. But people are so afraid now that they might just say, well, forget the whole land and just accept the Compact of Free Association so we can get the money. If they're well informed, and if they accept, that's my personal feeling, if they accept militarism because they are educated and well informed, then I don't mind, because they had choices.
Mr. President, I appear before you on behalf of the International League for Human Rights, a non-governmental organization in consultative status with the Economic and Social Council. The agreement between the government of the United States and the government of Palau regarding radioactive, chemical,
in December
and biological
1982,
substances
petitioners called UN attention
plainly
to
gives the
ballot
United
wording for
States
Palau's plebiscite,
more
which had
power.
been dictated by Washington.
I should add that just a few moments ago, I received in the chamber a copy of the official ballot on the plebiscite. Question B says as follows: do you approve the agreement under Section 314 of the Compact, which places restrictions and conditions on the United States with respect to radioactive, chemical, and biological materials? I would submit, Mr. President, that the Compact and its related documents now look like something designed by one of the more unscrupulous insurance companies. What is given on the front page, the Compact, may be taken away by the small print in the related agreements.
There's one section of the Compact that says no radioactive materials can be stored in Palau. Now that seems to be pretty clear, because after all, bombs contain radioactive materials. Well, in a subsidiary agreement, there's a clause that reinterprets that and says radioactive materials, and I want to read it because it's an example of the kind of things lawyers do to you. It says radioactive materials do not encompass weapons itself, but mean those radioactive or toxic chemical compounds which are designed for incorporation but not actually in place in any weapon. So there we get a complicated kind of legalistic exception. Then we go on and it says the government of the United States shall permit nuclear weapons in Palau only incident to transit or overflight during a national emergency or a state of war. It appears to be a very narrow exception until you get all the way down to the end where it says, or during a time of other military necessity as determined by the government of the United States. So what that really means to someone who's aware of U.S. legal traditions and the way compacts are written, what that really means is they can do it whenever they want.
A week before the plebiscite, a group of Palauan senators challenged Washington's ballot language in the Palauan Supreme Court. The American judge ruled the wording did not adequately and sufficiently set forth the issue to be voted on. More accurate language was chosen and preparations for the plebiscite continued. Days before the plebiscite, Trusteeship Council President Paul Pudad again led a UN team to Belau, this time to observe the referendum. In Koror, a public meeting was held to assess Palauans' preparedness for the vote.
Mr. President, I believe the political education program has been overly one-sided. There's been a majority of threats. For instance, they say that if you vote no, there is nowhere to turn to. That if you don't know, the United States has the power to come in and take your lands from you. I believe that the United States and the United Nations protects the principle of human dignity. I believe that if I were to ask a majority of this Palauan sitting here today a question pertaining to part of the compact, the majority of them would not know what my question is. How many of them know that if Palau should choose to terminate the Compact of Free Association, the 50-year land use right of the United States will not terminate? How many of them know that?
Three days before the plebiscite, Palauans marched to their president's office. They carried a petition signed by over 1/7 of registered voters requesting postponement of the plebiscite. They felt they were being rushed into voting without having enough time to inform themselves on the issues. Though their petition was rejected, it added to growing pressures on the government from other quarters.
Both the United States government and the elected government of Palau chose to ignore the role that is typically played by the traditional Council of Chiefs in Palau. Traditionally, and as a matter of culture, a consensus is reached on major issues in Palau by close consultation with the traditional Council of Chiefs.
2 days before the plebiscite, the office of the High Chief became a focus of activity. In front of it, a sun canopy was set up and the main road was blocked as foreign news crews rushed to the scene. Village chiefs were assembling from the outlying islands. Around Koror, word spread that something important was about to happen. By noon, busloads of women elders began arriving. These women, who play a pivotal role in Palau's traditional government, were joining the Council of Chiefs in a public meeting on the compact. All I have to tell you tribal leaders of Palau is, don't rush to change to the modern way. We may be the weaker of the two countries, but think of our land and our children. And I want to tell all of you gathered here that no one has been able to take my land yet. And I am determined no one ever will take away what is rightfully mine. I have nothing more to say. One by one, the traditional leaders announced their unanimous opposition to voting on the compact at that time. Their reason, insufficient time and information to prepare for such a major decision.
Originally, a lot of people were for the compact, but Abdul and the chiefs of Koror, the ladies of Palau, have changed the center of attention from financial assistance to the more humanity-related issues, like the commitment of 1/3 of our land to the United States military, like the waiver of our constitutional prohibition on the presence of nuclear substances in our islands. Once the focus of attention shifts from money to land, to our environment, to our culture, then really money doesn't really mean very much.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Republic of Palau, I'm Fred Cedar, President Reagan's personal representative. It's my great honor and privilege to present the President of the United States of America.
Greetings on this historic occasion to our friends in Micronesia. For many years, a very special relationship has existed between the United States and the people of the Trust Territory. Under the trusteeship, we've come to know and respect you as members of our American family. And now, as happens to all families, members grow up and leave home. I want you to know that we wish you all the best as you assume full responsibility for your domestic affairs and foreign relations. But you'll always be family to us. Over the years, perhaps the most lasting and valuable things we've built together are not the roads, the airports, the schools, and hospitals, but rather an understanding of the meaning of democracy and freedom and the dignity of self-determination. The Compact of Free Association that you've negotiated is an excellent document. It is the key to self-sufficiency and economic independence. Together, in free association, we can and will build a better life for all. I will support the Compact of Free Association when it is presented to the Congress of the United States for approval. But first, I must know your view as expressed by your vote in the plebiscite.
On February 10, 1983, Palauan voters made their choice under the eyes of the UN observation team. Late on election night, the counting began. As the first ballot box was opened, observers rushed forward to begin the tally.
No, 99.
When the counting was over, a new problem emerged. While the compact had passed by a margin of 11%, waiver of the nuclear-free clause had failed to get the required 75% approval. Therefore, under Palauan law, the compact could not take effect. Still, Washington insisted that it be implemented. The Palauan legislature voted that the compact was dead, and in a suit brought against the U.S. position by the High Chief, the Palauan Supreme Court ruled the compact unconstitutional.
Nonetheless, the United States persisted in their attitude that the compact had been approved, and even announced that they were creating a task force for purposes of implementing the compact within the Republic of Palau.
Attorney Patrick Smith had fought and won the Supreme Court case. Days later, his house became the target for unidentified arsonists.
My wife and I were sitting in our living room watching TV when we heard a huge splash.
I opened the door. I didn't see anybody, but I remember smelling gasoline. I turned around to walk back into the house, and I could see flames rising above the wall between the living room and the first bedroom. Pat yelled, "Oh my God, stay out." And by this time, the whole house was engulfed in flames. Next thing I remember was Pat somehow got through the fire, and we ran as fast as we could, as far as we could. Pat had on a pair of underwear, and I had on a nightgown. That's all that's left of our life in Palau. And everything we had in the world was in our house.
We intend to continue the battle, but to do it from a distance. And we are going to direct our efforts towards the United States Congress, where the ultimate decision regarding this Compact of Free Association will eventually be made.
There is a possibility here for a deal which does advance the interests of both parties. The Palauans want a nuclear-free zone. It seems to me that the key U.S. interest here, which is making sure that Palau doesn't become a base for anyone else, is exactly consistent with that feature of the Palauan Constitution. Both Palau and the United States could stand together in making Palau a nuclear-free zone.
When we conceive of a nuclear clause in the Constitution in the beginning, it was really the very selfish reason for protection of the people of Palau. But we do not allow anything nuclear in these islands. It should be peaceful for the people of Palau and all. But lately it has gained an international significance.
In a certain sense, those people are only asking what a majority of the people in the United States and Western Europe are requesting. They are only asking what 8 out of the 9 states that voted for a nuclear freeze in the United States last November were asking for. It takes a little different form, but it is part of the same broad thrust desire.
Anything nuclear affects everybody in the world. And we do our part over here as a small nation, fighting it for ourselves, and without realizing it, it's good for the whole world.
Does Palau have the right to remain nuclear-free, or will Washington's defense plans take precedence? The Palauan voters, legislature, and Supreme Court have spoken. Under UN trusteeship charter terms, responsibility for a final decision now rests with the U.S. Congress and UN Security Council.
Oh